All right, guys, I'm really excited today. I have Greg Linelli. He's got over 20 years of media experience, broadcasting, radio, TV, and today he's going to talk about how to crush an interview. I'm personally excited about this because I don't have experience with media trainers, so I want to learn everything there is to do about kind of getting ready for that interview and how to practice. So walk us through kind of what your first steps are and what you would recommend to anyone who has that first big radio interview or TV interview.
I think one of the first things you want to do is do a little research on who's interviewing you. Get an idea of the questions they may ask, even the tone of the person who's doing the interview. I think that can help and settle you down a little bit as you enter that chair. And then there's just a couple of other basic things, whether it's a phone interview or whether it's a TV interview. You want to find a place that isn't echoey. You want to make sure that when you speak that, there's not a lot of echoing going on in the background, which I think can help. Also, the coloring in the background. You don't want anything that's going to be too distracting that takes away from you. Let's face it, you are the person that is going to be shining. You don't want some picture in the background that's going to take away from what you can accomplish. So I think those are a couple of things everybody. If you're doing a radio interview, you want to have great reception. And sometimes I would just tell, whether it's my client or whether it's me, if you can get on a landline, that would be ideal because you're not going to have bad cell service typically. But now the way iPhones are, for the most part, those are pretty good. But that would be one tip if you can. Do a landline if it's for radio. For TV, again, it's just finding a place that's pretty quiet, the background's not too distracting, and do a little research on the person that's interviewing you.
Let's start from the beginning. So I know as I'm new to doing podcasts, I'm new to doing interviews, I always have butterflies at the beginning. Is there anything that you've done in the past to help you kind of, obviously practicing will help, but any tricks or tips on how to calm down? Because I know even in the middle of an interview, sometimes for no reason I'll get nervous. I'll feel like the pressure's on me.
Sure.
And I don't really I usually don't stumble through, but I feel like I start sweating. And
right.
What do you do in that situation?
So that's normal.
Yeah.
And that really is. And really the best advice is the more you do it, the better you'll feel and the more comfortable you'll feel. Outside of that, understand going into an interview, you are the thought leader. You are the expert. So try to be as confident as possible. The person interviewing you doesn't know the topic. So that should put you at ease. They want to know something about you. They brought you on for a reason. So speak with confidence and repetition. The more you do it, the better you get at it. You can do some mock interviews whether it's in front of a mirror or if you have a friend that's in broadcasting that might be willing to do some of those things with you to go over questions and put you in the hot chair, so to speak. I think that would be beneficial, but do as many as you can. The messaging will be a lot cleaner and smoother moving forward, but try and be as confident as you can because you're the one that they're bringing on to be the expert.
So as you with your clients, as a publicist, what can you do to help prepare them and not just quiz them and answers? Do you work with the radio broadcaster, TV, whoever? Do you help screen the questions that are going to be asked? What do you guys do?
So I always try, if I can, to get the questions for my clients because a lot of them haven't had a lot of radio or TV experience. Now listen, in the broadcasting business, there are times the person who is doing the interviewing will go rogue and they will go different down a path that maybe you weren't prepared for. Those are situations where, again, probably repetition will come in and you'll be able to understand how to handle those situations a little bit better. But I like to try and get my clients prepared as much as possible by getting them the questions. And then I go in and I just basically tell them, listen, try not to stumble through the interview using things, that's all. Everybody uses it, so don't worry if you do. But if you can try and eliminate that word and not stutter and stumble and speak confidently and say something that is interesting. A lot of times everybody wants to give the pretty generic answer. And listen, you're a thought leader. You're being interviewed because you bring something to the table. Say something that's interesting.
Yeah.
And those are the tips. I don't want to give my client too much because I think they start thinking about what they're going to say and then they don't do anything. So I think those are a couple of things that they can do right off the bat that will help them.
And I think the interesting part's very important because people love controversy. Andrew Tate is all over the internet, whether you like him or don't like him.
Yeah.
Every time I go on TikTok or Instagram, I see his stuff because it's the way he presents it.
Yeah.
It's controversial. It makes you think either you hate him or you love him.
Right.
But either way, you're thinking about him.
That's true.
Therefore, he wins. So what do you do? And this is a hard one, but kind of if you get a question that you feel is inappropriate, you don't want to answer. I know there's a lot of CEOs that have pretty much lost their job because they've answered the wrong question.
Sure.
How do you table that or kind of control that narrative and stop it or move it to something else?
Right. So if let's say I'm being interviewed and let's say you ask me a question that's pretty personal that wasn't maybe something we discussed beforehand.
Right.
I would just say, I would play it off. I just, Scott, look, that's probably something down the road or when we get off the air we can discuss. But I don't think it's something appropriate that we should talk about right now. I mean, again, it's really a feel thing.
Yeah.
And what's your personality? My personality is pretty outgoing, so I may play off of that and maybe try and crack a joke and say, look, I mean, we're not going to get into that right now. Maybe afterwards we can get into it. But some people may freeze and they may be like, well, probably the best way to go about that is, you know what, I'm not comfortable answering that question right now, but, if that's something you want to discuss down the road, we can. And I put it back on the person doing the interview because really that wasn't your domain, that wasn't your strength, and make him feel a little bit nervous, the person who asked you the question.
Yeah, I like that. I've also heard of kind of answering a question with a question. So if you kind of push it back on them.
Be true. Yeah.
So that'd be a good way to kind of spin it back around.
It breaks the ice.
Yeah.
It breaks the ice.
They ask you and be like, well, actually, how would you handle that? And you put it right back at them because they're trying to sandbag you.
Right.
So it's a fun way to
It is.
But there's a lot of ways to do that. But anyways, let's go back to the basics a little bit. Let's
Yeah.
talk about equipment. So you mentioned, landline for radio interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that you recommend for radio? I know that when I've done interviews before, they asked me to use wire headphones because they were worried that if I use Bluetooth or something, it would die or the audio quality.
And that's a fair point. And listen, when you deal with technology, there's always a chance something is going to go wrong.
Yep.
So I think that's actually a good point. If something does go wrong with the phone or let's say the Zoom link, it's always good to have a backup.
Yep.
And so whether that is a phone, whether that's another piece of equipment, usually give it to the producer beforehand. A lot of times the on-air talent will say, my producer's going to reach out to you. They're going to send you a Zoom link, but can we also get a backup number just in case something happens? And a lot of times these interviews are recorded, so you can work with them a little bit if something does go wrong. So that would be the biggest advice would be just maybe have a backup plan or
like
two.
that.
Because honestly, equipment... It fails a lot of times, and there's not much you can do. Now, if you're in an interview and something happens, or let's say your earpiece comes off, or let's say the host is starting to break up, and you're in the middle of a live interview, just do your best to maybe answer the question as best you can, and then at the end you can sit there and say, well, Dave, I'm having a hard time hearing you right now, and then at that point you can also hang up and call back the studio. Those are things that you have to feel comfortable in doing. Probably your first couple of interviews, you would just let the producer call you back.
Perfect. What about Zoom interviews? We kind of covered radio where you're going to want, landline, ideally wire connection, whatever you can do there. But then Zoom's a whole other world. A lot of TV interviews that we get our clients are actually through Zoom. So what are kind of the basics to setting that up, equipment? Right now we're shooting on cameras.
Yeah.
Is it worth that investment? What do you recommend?
So I think if you are doing a lot of TV hits, it probably is best served to get some of the best equipment you can because you want to look good. Mm-hmm. Some of the things still apply, in terms of the background. Don't make it too distracting if you can. And I think, again, finding a place where the reception is going to be good. Outside of that, again, it's basically is the connection going to hold up? And sometimes that's out of your control.
Yeah. What about clothing?
So clothing's a good one. Again, similar to in the background is just not dress professionally. Let's put it that. I would rather have you overdressed than coming off in cutoffs and a hoodie.
Yep.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. And look, down the road, when you get comfortable with a host who may have you on here and there, and that's how they dress, if that's how you want to go about it, go for it. But I think anytime you are going to be talking about, especially a serious topic, I would, something that we're dressed to right now, I probably stay away from the t-shirts or anything that's not seen as professional, especially early on, because I think you get that first opportunity to make that impression right away, and you want it to be a positive one.
And I've been told in the past nothing too loud, so stripes and different colors might clash with your background. So you have to look at kind of what you're wearing compared to your background and make sure you sometimes don't disappear.
It's a good point. It's a good point. And stripes maybe makes me look a little heavier, so I stay away from that. But no, I think that's very solid, especially because you're basically going to be interviewed from the waist up.
Yep.
And again, nothing that's too distracting for sure.
Yeah, I always shoot for solid colors, and
That's
then
good.
I wear boxers underneath, so don't need those candles. What about lighting? So I know with Zoom, lighting is critical. I personally use a special webcam. I have a camera set up. You can buy webcams for like $20 all the way to a couple $100. But lighting, I think, is even more important than the webcam.
It can be for sure, and it's that one I think is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, don't do the interview in your closet. Where the lighting is not very good. But a good way to test that is to to test it out.
Yeah.
Even beforehand. Try and get an idea. If you know you're going to be doing an interview in a couple of days, have one of your friends set up a Zoom link and, do a mock interview that way. It'll give you an opportunity to see, how do you look on camera? What's the lighting look like? Do you need to move to another room that has better lighting? So I think the great thing about Zoom is typically they're not that same day when you're setting up for an interview. I mean, sometimes they are. But if you're somebody who is looking to get into that TV hit, I think it's always good to play around with the equipment, a week or two before.
Yeah, and I know one of the frustrations I had, especially when we first started, is we'd have clients get on TV and they'd have a window behind them. So all you could see was dark,
right?
And then they had Zoom with their webcam from their computer that was probably 10 years old, and then no microphone. So
the microphone's a big deal.
Microphone's a huge deal.
Yeah. Well, because it's echoey, and I've run into this issue a couple of times with clients, even if it's just a journalist who's recording for an article. It's not even on the air. You don't want that echoey sound to come through because it's hard to understand.
Yeah.
And I think that's something you can control. And I think there's like a little checklist that you can make before you get into these interviews, whether it's TV, whether it's with a reporter, or whether it's radio. Just have 2 or 3 things that you can control, and it'll make your life a lot easier.
Awesome. So I appreciate all the information, Greg. Thank you so much for being here. Kind of let's summarize it. Any last tips for people, and kind of how do they reach out to you?
Well, they can reach out to me at gregory.linelli@Otter PR, and we'd be happy to take you on and get you some good hits, and it's been a lot of fun there. In terms of the interview process, be prepared. Make sure the equipment is sound. Those are 2 things you can control. How you dress, what it looks like behind you, those are all things you can control. And then in terms of the interviews, take as many as you can, because the only way you're going to get better is by doing it over and over again, and you will get better. And of course, if anybody has questions, they can hit up Ryan Bass.
Yep.
They can hit up Otter to talk about how to be a bit better or a lot better in front of the media, because as you know, Scott, there are a lot of opportunities our clients get on the air, which has been great, and we want to make them shine.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
This was great.
A lot of fun.